Hello and welcome to the online module on positive behavior interventions and supports. Our first image here is the multi-tiered system of support triangle, and you'll see this triangle come up a lot in education. The big idea here is that most students will actually benefit from school-wide, culturally relevant and responsive systems of support. So 75 to 90% of students will respond to these types of things. So in PBIS, it's more like positive relationships with all students and also responding to any sort of behavior problem. The way that you see this in schools is through the social emotional learning curriculum that we have. There's things like the good behavior game or 17 proactive classroom management. There's the physiology for learning, so talking about diet, exercise, sleep, hygiene, and stress management. These are things that all students can benefit from, and including instructors too. So really, it's the universal attempts at making sure that things go well in your classroom. Then you have the tier 2, which are a little bit more selective. So these are for the kids who seem to be showing more or different behaviors, or the behaviors manifesting a little bit differently in them, I guess you could say. And they might need just a little bit more. So it could be that you have like classroom or small group strategies that you use. This is about 10 to 25% of your students, and they'll respond to this really well. So this could mean possibly behavior contracting or self-monitoring, teaching self-monitoring skills. Could be maybe even talking to the home or creating some sort of mentor program. Differential reinforcement, maybe some positive peer reporting, or more specific small group social emotional learning or social skills training. Then you have the most intense, this is 3 to 5% of the students who might need these targeted intensive interventions. These are called tier 3 interventions oftentimes. And this is where the FBA, the Functional Behavior Assessment Behavior Intervention Plan comes in. You do replacement behavior training, possibly some counseling or therapy, maybe even some wraparound services for the family. This is the highest level, and this one is the most supported with outside people as well. So that's just to kind of give you a quick introduction. Next, this is the agenda for today. I'm going to go over the educational laws, IDEA and ESSA, and then talk a little bit about the multi-tiered systems of support, which are RTI and PBIS, which are what we're going to be focusing on today. And then we're going to look at the modified functional behavior assessment that we're going to be doing in class, and talk a little bit about PBIS tier support, so the online supports that you have, and then the module activity. So as you can see, MTSS stands for multi-tiered system of support. So here's the 3 tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, as I just went over. And you can see that PBIS is also under this multi-tiered system of approach, and so is response to intervention. I'm assuming you heard about response to intervention in your other classes, and just knowing that majority of the interventions will be done at the universal level, so across the school, across the class. And then that it's also about school and community collaboration, so it's not just trying to work by yourself, it's about helping parents be informed and work with the schools. It's about curriculum design, so actually putting together your lessons to make sure that you're supporting the needs of all of your learners. Professional development, so continuing to get trained and supported on these different academic and behavioral supports. It's about working in multidisciplinary teams, and then you'll see UDL at the bottom here. And these multi-tiered systems of support are most successful when you are really working at meeting the needs of all of your students, using the different supports that we know that work. So now we're on to IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So this actually came out of the Civil Rights Act way back when, and then one of the areas that they looked at was, are all people getting education? And so eventually they got to IDEA, and the big one we have now is in 2004, and it hasn't been reauthorized since. So that's the law that we follow. The idea of FBAs and behavior intervention plans and positive behavior support actually came out of the reauthorization in 1997. And they basically said if there's somebody whose behaviors are impeding their learning or the learning of others, we need to do something about it. And then in 2004, they became a little bit more focused and explicit about exactly what that would look like. And that's when they said, okay, we need to start looking at this PBIS, positive behavior interventions and supports, and start actually looking at what we're doing in the classrooms before we all of a sudden put them on a behavior support plan. So schools were mandated and still are mandated to implement positive behavior interventions and supports. And it's a good thing because they actually have been shown to reduce problem behaviors, referrals, suspensions, and expulsions when and only when the schools actually implement the PBIS systems with fidelity. So that means that everybody on the school campus is actually doing this. They're all following the rules. They are all working to make sure that the students are supported in the agreed upon way. And that means that you have to have training and support, and you have to have an understanding of the philosophy and also the methodology, so that everybody's actually really believes in what they're doing when it comes to these different supports. And also, when families and students are involved, it's not just a top-down, teachers are saying this is what you have to do, but rather everybody on this multidisciplinary team is coming together and saying, how can we support this student? So the other big law is Every Student Succeeds Act. And if you ever heard about No Child Left Behind, which was really big when I first got into education, this is just the reauthorized law of No Child Left Behind. I just noticed we're missing some of this. I'm going to change the size. Oops, there we go, and then we'll bring that down. So anyway, the big thing with ESSA, is what it's called, is the idea that, first of all, every student has access to quality public education regardless of where they live, how they learn, or how much money their parents make. This also comes from another act, which was the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. And it's been reauthorized to add more and more supports. And the big change was around the school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports being part of this 2015 reauthorization. And they're saying that they have to be cross-cutting, so across the school and across the different grade levels, school-wide and evidence-based. So the school-wide programs have to have a description of how needs of at-risk children will be met, and that might be around the implementation of school-wide tiered model to prevent and address behavior. It could be early intervening services coordinated with similar activities and services under IDEA, and then making sure that the school-wide tiered model is used to prevent and address problem behavior. That actually says the same thing. So really looking at, how are these interventions chosen, and are you actually choosing interventions that will help the students? So here is just some pieces, and we've talked about this in class, so I won't go too much into it. But the most important thing with the ESSA and the multi-tiered system of support, which remember is that triangle with the 3 tiers, is that there are varying levels of support. So there are 3 tiers. So not everybody is going to be sent to a counselor or tutoring. That there will be things that happen in the classes to, maybe like wellness or skill promotion. So maybe in your class you decide that you're going to teach like self-management or organization skills, and that can actually go in and everyone will benefit from that type of services. But that sometimes students need a little bit more. So maybe you put them in a small group to check each other's binders at the end. Well, I guess we don't really use binders, but check each other's homework list at the end of the day. And, or maybe put them in study groups so that they can work on things. Or, maybe you have a group that have test anxiety. And so you start pulling them together and saying, okay, we're having a test come up, let's talk about what this will look like and what you can do to make sure that you're prepared for it. So those are more of the tier 2. The screening, that it is actually part of the law to say that you will go through and you'll screen for not just academic levels, but also the behavioral and social levels. That this is something that we need and that we use the data to really make decisions on how to support students best and how to address challenges or areas of concern. That once you do address those areas of concern, that you will monitor the progress. So you have some sort of evidence-based strategy that you implement, and then you measure whether the student is actually improving. So let's go back to the example of test anxiety. There's a lot of information out there on what people can do around anxiety. And so, the progress monitoring is, actually, I'll just pull one of these websites up. Oh, it's right here. So we're going to look right here at anxiety. So we'll click on that. And this website actually goes through and asks you, okay, this is what anxiety looks like. Is this what your student looks like? Here's some body symptoms. Yes, this describes the student. And then here's some interventions. So, maybe you teach them deep breathing or how to break down an assignment or help them start the assignment or the test or giving them reassurance. All of these types of things, teaching them coping skills. So you can click on this and it's got some ways to teach coping skills. So what do you do to teach coping skills? So maybe these are the types of things that you do with a small group because it's, there's more than one student who's really struggling with this. And then you check to see, like, okay, have you done all of those? Did you do your deep breathing before you started the test? Did you, yes or no? And you kind of keep track of that. And then you see how the student does based on whether they've implemented these strategies or supports. And then you make decisions based on the data. So you come together in a team that includes hopefully the parent and or the family and the child. And you talk about, like, hey, did this work or did this not? You have other teachers in there to say, hey, this is how it worked in my class. I'd like to see more of this, or maybe this student actually does better. So that's the data-driven decision. So the effectiveness of MTSS. So this is, by the way, Obama signing the ESSA into law. But the effectiveness, it improves outcomes for all students. Like even the high-performing students actually do better when we have these universal supports and interventions in our classes. It improves instruction and alignment of curriculum for general ed and special ed. There's improved school climate and safety. It creates a safe and supportive learning environment where there's a reduction of bullying and harassment. Students' mental and behavioral health are supported. And there is usually effective disciplinary policies and practices because everybody is actually on the same team and working towards the same goal. And ESSA really does recognize the effectiveness of MTSS. That's why we spend a whole semester on really focusing on these things, because it's not just a federal law, but it's also best practice. So here is a little Venn diagram of response to intervention and positive behavior supports and interventions and supports. So RTI and PBIS. So remember, this is academic, this is behavioral, and then this is everything how they overlap. So you can see these have specific academic assessments and interventions. These ones have specific social emotional assessments and interventions, but both of them have scientifically based interventions. So I'll let you, if you want to pause and just take a look at a few of these. I won't go through them all, but this is, to me, was really helpful to say, like, okay, these are things that, how these two things fit together as well. So a functional behavior assessment is actually one of the top tier 3 approaches. And that is that for these chronic and excessive problems that you sometimes have to do things that are more intense. In this class, we're doing a modified behavior assessment. So we've taken it down a few notches, but it's really important for you to know what the law says and best practice around FBAs. One is it's a multi-step process. You identify the factors, you try to figure out what the function of the behavior is. Why is this happening? Is it around attention? Is it around escape? Do they want some sort of tangible reinforcement? Or is it something else? Because it could be. And then you try to develop interventions to replace the negative behavior. Instead of grabbing a student, using your words and really trying to help the student that's grabbing to be able to communicate in another way. Here's just another note. In special education law, we have what's called a manifestation determination. And this is when a student has either been suspended for 10 days or they do something that's almost an expellable act. And then you might have one of these meetings. And usually from these meetings, or oftentimes from these meetings, they determine if it's the disability that caused whatever the occurrence, the behavior or the expulsory act came from. And oftentimes from these manifestation determination meetings, they'll decide, you know what, we need to look at the function of the behavior. So we need to do a full functional behavior assessment. And it's usually the psychologist that completes the whole thing in conjunction with the family and the teachers and the student and the school. But that's why we're just doing a modified one. So let's talk about that a little bit. So here's the modified one. We always need to start with looking at strengths. We need to identify and define the target behavior. We need to review the student's records. We need to checklist some data. We need to do student interviews and learn about that student. We also have to do other interviews, teacher, family, administration. We need to create multidisciplinary teams and meet. And the multidisciplinary team is really important because sometimes a student does really well in one class and really not in another. So if you can bring those teachers together to really talk about, well, what are you doing differently? I remember I worked with one art teacher who they asked me to come in and figure out what it was that she was doing that she needed more support on. And when I went in there, it dawned on me that her class, the structure of an art class, is more free and unstructured. So they were given an assignment and then they were asked to work on it. So some of the students who were in her class who really struggled with unstructured time were then causing behavior issues. But, the administration was like, you need to fix your class. And I actually was thinking, you know what, actually we need to give more training and support to the students and then also the administration on how to support students who don't do as well in unstructured time and what we can do to help structure their time so that they can, do the work in the class and get their credits as well. And so it was a lot of work that ended up coming because we weren't just trying to fix her and make her change exactly how she was doing things in her art class. So really kind of bringing people together and talking about their different ideas is important. The ecological context, so that's really looking at what's happening in the environment, who is the child interacting with, all of those types of things, and what effect is that having on them. Developing hypothesis, intervention, and supports is another piece of this. Direct observations, an important thing. We can sometimes make assumptions. I've been in lots of meetings where the teacher has said, "Oh, that student never listens," and then I've asked, well, what does that mean? How long don't they listen for? How often? Or, is it on certain parts of the class? All of those things. So one of the things we're going to be doing in this class is learning about these different types of ways to do some direct observation and pull together some analysis from the data. And then, of course, you would use that to possibly create some behavior intervention plans, behavior goals, or a safety plan if the student, there's safety issues. All right, now we're going to go into how a team learns more about the student. Once again, we've talked about the review of records and the interviews and observations, the ecological or environmental inventory, looking at the self-determination skills. So in this class, we are having you do the culturally responsive student transition presentation. And hopefully in that, you'll get to know okay, this is what the student wants. These are their interests. This is where they see themselves going in this life. And then you can start helping support them on those. And then, of course, the antecedent behavior and consequence is really looking at what's the purpose of the behavior and how do we, if we eliminate the purpose, will the behavior stop? Another thing I want to note is just the cultural biases we sometimes have with students. And I put African American, and I would put actually, that's LA is Latin American, but or Latino, but actually we now use Latino X and things like that. So then there's poverty, there's ability or disability. Oftentimes we make assumptions about what students are able to do before we've actually spoken to them and really uncovered what it is that they're interested or what they want to do. And these different groups are given more office referrals, and we see that in the literature over and over again. So the positive effects of PBIS. So I'm not going to go into this. I've talked about it. You can pause and kind of read through this, but the big idea here is that PBIS actually does work for really improving the way that the school, the classroom, and the students feel, and even the teachers. When teachers know what to expect, then they feel safer and less anxiety within their job as well. These are just the 3 tiers. So we've got Tier 1, Tier 2. These are the ones we're going to be really looking at in this class. And Tier 3 is the one that's more intensive and is usually done with a full team. So Tier 1 interventions. So these are using small groups sometimes. So having grouping students for different activities, cooperative learning groups, modeling, giving students choice between 2 or 3 things, making sure that you're in line with the school-wide system of support, looking at the relationships you have with any sort of student with problem behaviors, looking at your cultural biases and how those might be influencing how you connect or have relationships with students. And then also thinking about if you're being compassionate. A lot of times people think they're being compassionate by lowering standards. And what we found is that's actually not true. So, having someone who's dealing with anxiety not have to do any of the work actually doesn't help them, because then they don't actually get to access whatever the learning is. Or maybe you have them going and leaving the room. That also doesn't help them, because part of what we're trying to do is prepare them for social situations in life and things like that. So, there may be some exceptions to those examples, but, really kind of thinking about ways that we're compassionately providing these supports, and that it may not, it's not a black and white conversation. I like to always kind of bring us back to why we're doing the things we're doing. So, Professor Chumley is going through the restorative practices. That is a Tier 1 intervention. It's universal. And here's some reasons why it's really great inside the classroom, which I know that you've been going through with your book. Another Tier 1 is the use of multidisciplinary teams. This can go across the whole school. This allows for collaboration and building empathy. It allows for problem solving and really helps you look at some of the intrinsic motivation. But it's really about kind of coming together and saying, okay, how can we even mediate conflicts and disagreements? How can we define and address special topics or issues that come up? So it's really about building relationships also within the school. So just some things that we want to think about. So before you move from one tier to another, you always want to make sure that you have done all of the things that you could do. And so this is just some example. And what I want to really point out here is that most of these things are around supporting students in their internal, intrinsic lives. So it's not so much about having, you'll notice that we don't have a lot of star charts and things like that. I mean, I'm not saying that star charts are not a good thing, but it's really about helping our learners learn how to be learners and learn how to support each other. And so, we talked last week about the positive self-talk statements. And so that, just even changing the way that we even talk to ourselves sometimes works for this type of thing. And then the Tier 2 interventions, you see that okay, now you're thinking a little bit deeper. Are these feasible? How is my lesson planning? Is it engaging? Am I actually doing what I need to do there? Are there some procedures that I could change to reduce some of the behaviors in the classroom? And so those oftentimes are things that you want to just kind of check in with yourself about as you're moving from tier to tier. I like to have this visual because these researchers actually went through and they found these different 24 evidence-based practices. And then they said, okay, well, these ones are academic or cognition. This one's behavior, communication, play, social, and transition. So EC is early childhood, EL is elementary, MH is middle and high school. Okay, so if you want to know, all right, I work in a kindergarten class and I really want to work on communication. So you can go here and you can see that differential reinforcement and discrete training both work for early childhood. You can see peer-mediated instruction works really well for communication as well. Look at this. Self-management works across all age levels and also all the domains, which is pretty impressive, as do visual supports. So the more, self-management training and visual supports we can put in the classroom, the better it will be for all of our students at every level. So those might be the types of interventions when we get to the intervention stage of this class that you think about. All right, so choosing tier 2 intervention. So I'm going to go back to this website and how to use it and everything, but really coming up with specific behavior goals with a target date for meeting them, and coming up with a system of systematic explicit direct instruction on a skill. There's a little RECA feedback. If you can remember systematic explicit direct instruction, that is often the answer to many of your questions, because you need to explicitly teach skills in reading when a student doesn't have those skills. Same thing with behavior. If a student, hasn't been in a family that knows how to share, you might explicitly have to teach that student how to share. And it's okay to do that. There's no shame in that type of thing. So anyway, so these are just there's more examples, but let's jump into the website. So I have 3 websites here. I'm going to go to this first one, which I actually already visited a second ago. There we go. Here is the website. So let's start with the home. And this is where you find all these different behaviors. And this isn't an exhaustive list, but it's a pretty good list. And so once you figure out the behavior, we'll look at rushing through work. Then we're going to click on that, and this tells us what it looks like. Is this your student? Yes. This goes through and gives us some interventions to use, and we can actually click on those. More structured routines. So we'll just pick that one because we were talking about the art class anyway. What should you do? When should you do it? How do you do it? And then resources. So here's some resources for rules, routines, and standards in elementary and secondary grades. And so we can click on that and learn more. This is from educationworld.com, which is a good resource as well. And it will come up eventually. So anyway, this PBIS world so here's an article that talks a little bit more about this and gives you some sample procedures and things like that you can use if you want to establish more standards in your class. All right, let's click back. So the next one I want to show you is this website. And this is actually from California. The state of California put this out. And it's the Positive Environment Network of Trainers. And in here, they actually have a lot of really great supports and forums and things like that for students. So I'm just going to go in here, behavior planning. Oops. My internet's not quite so fast, but there we go. And you can see they've got examples of intervention plans, functional assessment, all of these types of things, disabilities and behaviors. The forums, I'm going to go to the forums now, and you can see that they've got a lot of different forums, so like goal writing for general positive behavior increase or problem behavior increase. So they've got monitoring, they've got the 3 tiers for RTI, for social and emotional support. So you can see that they've got a lot of these different types of things. They've got progress monitoring, so if you needed a progress monitoring sheet, and then specific things on like traumatic brain injury, discipline and things like that. And this is all up to date, so you know that you're getting the research-based practices if you use this website. The third website is called Intervention Central. And Intervention Central is a response to intervention site. And so when this loads up, you can see it says academic interventions, behavior interventions. CBM is curriculum-based measures and downloads. So I'm just going to click on the behavior interventions. And then there's also these tools here. So those are often very useful. So you can look through, we've got diffusing or de-escalating, self-management. Remember, self-management stuff is helpful at every level. Motivation, so if you want to try doing some motivation work, bully prevention, school-wide classroom management. So these are all the different types of interventions that work, so maybe you could pick one of those to help your student. All right, then, whoops, doing it again, there we go. Then let's get to our activity for this online module. So first of all, on this activity, you're going to go into the assignment and you're going to explain what your role in the PBIS process is as a teacher. So you're going to tell me, why are we doing the PBIS? How can you help support the system with like the multidisciplinary teams? Why don't we just say you can give me 3 examples of what you need to do. That seems useful. And then for your case study student, I want you to, you have identified hopefully 1 or 2 problem behaviors. And I want you to just go through these 3 websites and see if there's any sort of materials that you could use to either understand the student more or possible interventions, and then explain how that resource or idea will help your case study. So for example, remember I mentioned the self-management, here's attention to instruction. So I'm going to click on that one. So maybe if I have a student who's struggling with attention, then I can go through and teach this self-monitoring as a tool. So it goes up, it tells you how to set up the class, here's the sheet, and how to use it. So you can go through, and even troubleshooting. And it gives you a download for the this download self-monitoring sheet. So that might be something that you choose. Maybe it's even, using guidelines for 9 types of curricular adaptations or something like that. And you go through and click on that and realize, oh, this would help my student. Or you go through and say, I am, which one was it? Structured routines. So how to do it, I'm going to, create a class schedule that can be posted with words and pictures. So, I'm trying to help my students so that they have visual supports as well, which remember was an intervention that works at every level. So that's going to be your homework. So let's just go into the module so that we can, see where we turn this in. And so here's the module. It's got those directions. You're going to click on the module. There's going to be a video right there. And as you scroll down, it says Write Submission. You're going to click on Write Submission, and you can just write your answers to these 4 prompts right then and there, okay? If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to me. I'm here to help you. Have a great day.